Scott Stewart is Chief Executive Officer of IBI Group, Inc. and IBI Group, responsible for providing executive leadership with a particular focus on operational management and execution. He became Chief Executive Officer in August 2013, but has been with the firm since 1983, initially as a transportation engineer and planner. He led the development of the intelligence sector of the firm, turning it into a worldwide business with projects and offices around the world. Scott has been an active member in a number of professional organizations, including sitting on the board of the Transportation Association of Canada, TAC, and the board of ITS Canada, where he fulfilled various roles, including chair. Scott received his Bachelor of Science Civil Engineering degree from the University of Waterloo. Welcome, Scott.
Yeah, nice to be here today with you.
Great. We're really excited to have this conversation with you. I've known you for quite some time, and I've always found you as a pioneer. So let's drill down in a little bit to that today.
I trust that's not a commentary on my age, Terry.
No. All right. So why don't we start off by you telling us a little bit about where did Scott come from? Where did you grow up? What made Scott Stewart who Scott Stewart is today?
I had the pleasure of being born and raised in the formative years of my life in Sudbury, Ontario, and it's certainly a great place to come from. But what was so compelling about it for me, and I really didn't appreciate it at the time, was that it was so multicultural, and there was also there were no barriers in terms of class or income, because everybody was doing very well, and you blended together and you acquired this great appreciation for European culture and nationalities. And that was one part of it. The other part of it was that in my summer work terms, I was able to work for the mines, and therefore also was able to pay my way through school through the co-op program at the University of Waterloo. And like most other guys, I played various sports. So I was in football and hockey and track and field. And I found that was a really instructive insight into how people work together and how teams are formed and what was important as a team as opposed to an individual.
You had mentioned that you'd received advice from a school counselor that led you to where you are today. Can you tell the listeners about that?
Well, I was reasonably good in sciences and maths, and also I had won a couple of scholarships in art, and I thought, well, my goodness, but what a fabulous combination! Maybe I'll become an architect. And my high school counselor gave me some very interesting advice, and he said, Scott, that 90% of all buildings are designed by engineers. And I thought, well, that's really quite interesting. Maybe I want to be an engineer instead, and I'll design all those buildings. What he didn't tell me is that also included Quonset huts and as part of the buildings that engineers designed. So I with that, I then went off to Waterloo and joined the civil engineering program at the university.
All right. So now let's fast forward. You start your career, your professional career. You've graduated, and you migrate to what's your first job after graduation?
I go back to Sudbury because I was given this great opportunity to work in the transportation department, but we were also then doing a major regional transportation plan. With that, there was an economic review that was undertaken. There was a land use element to it, and I was part of that team at a very young age, putting together a strategic plan for Sudbury. And one of the most interesting things about it was that when we looked at the forecast of population and employment, we were looking at negative growth, and it became a huge challenge of how do you then manage for negative growth. But the other thing that then was tied into that was really compelling for me is how it tied together economic activity, growth, mobility, to underpin an urban environment and to help define all those relationships between the built form, the mobility, the infrastructure to support those activities, all driven by economics. And that became a very significant part of my interest. And I also, within that particular initiative, was responsible for putting together an economic model and an integrated land use, transportation economic model. And that really helped give me a perspective on what urban development was all about.
So you took that lens, you took that view, and now you look at cities holistically in a much different way.
Absolutely.
So from your studies in Sudbury, where did you go from there?
I then I had the pleasure of going to the city of Halifax, where there was a group set up to deal with the transportation problems in the city of Halifax, because there was expected, and there was, urban development taking place along the waterfront, and transportation was a huge issue. And the group that I was part of was the Halifax Traffic Management Board. And it was all about taking different approaches, including the application of technology, to managing transportation demand. Everything from improving transit services in the urban area, but also to providing better information to users about how to get to and from different locations, how they got back and forth to work. And so it was a fascinating program. It was at that time, a very significant effort financially. And we were given a free rein about what we could, relatively free rein, about what we could apply in the way of technology to improve transportation in the city.
So what time frame was that?
That was, my goodness, thank you. That was in the early 80s. And I mean, what was so compelling was this whole idea of technology and computers to do this, to provide the solution. Now, we were way ahead of our time in terms of thinking. We were ahead of our times in terms of what was really practically available. But this whole idea of a traffic management center was so compelling because it dealt with multiple modes, all operating under one kind of broader set of objectives and policies.
So now you've been able to connect technology to solving a problem, a more global issue. Where did you take your learnings from there?
I then joined Transport Canada for a period of time, and I moved to Montreal. And I was with the Transportation Demand Center in Montreal, TDC it was called. And they were involved in funding various research programs across the country in sort of new technology. It was sort of a variation of what we now see as incubators. And I mean, strangely enough, it was one of the first pilots of a changeable message sign on a highway. And it was one project down in Vancouver. Now you see them all over the country. And what was so interesting is, that is just one example, was to see how that one new initiative could provide such significant benefits, and how it then turned into a business that then has really certainly rolled out across Canada, but also you now see it as a standard feature globally. Help managing traffic, making the environment better, safer environment, and cutting down the congestion.
So now you've seen technology work multiple times. You have, you join IBI and you take this learning and you start to apply it to more of a global approach.
Well, I then joined IBI and moved to Toronto. It was a firm of about 60 people at the time. And the firm was very heavily involved in policy work, strategic planning for Transport Canada. And it was innovative in that it wasn't focused on design and construction as a solution. It was really looking at behaviors and how you could impact behavior to then reduce the congestion and maybe avoid having to build. So that whole notion of managing activity then became of major interest. But the other thing is that was a consulting firm. It was a high-end consulting firm. It came out of KPMG, and it was a partnership structure. And I quickly realized that we were pretty heavy with some very at the top with some very, very bright people, and I had to find a different avenue. And so the avenue that I then sought out was maybe in the area of technology, we can carve out something that's really unique about IBI in the transportation field.
So just for the listeners' benefit, when did IBI also take on traditional architecture and engineering?
When IBI broke away from what was then Pete Marwick and Partners and now KPMG, it broke away because it had been doing a lot of policy work in housing. And the principals at the time decided that, you know, they really wanted to get into creating the solution as opposed to advising on the solution. And part of that creating the solution was then to get into architecture, to actually create the physical form of what they had talked about as an important service. So the architecture started with the establishment of the firm, which was in approximately 1978, and I joined later in the early 80s. And so, but it started very small. It started as 30 people with 2 offices, one in Toronto and one in Vancouver. And it had an ambition to become a major architectural firm, which it has. You know, IBI is now probably the 6th or 8th largest architectural firm globally, and 1 of 2 of the top, depending how you look at it, architectural firms in Canada.
And how many employees do you have?
We have a total of 2,700 firm across the firm, and that's globally. We have about 60 offices globally, and the office structure ranges from India, where we have 2 offices, to Los Angeles, where we have a couple of offices, actually many offices along the west coast of the United States. So yes, 2,700 people, 60 offices, and 6 continents.
Excellent. So when did you see it was time for IBI to step outside of North America and start applying smart city techniques globally?
Well, the first was in Toronto, was sort of to solve the problem of transportation. We saw an opportunity to actually create the solution for the traffic management system, and that was on the Burlington Skyway. And so it was a Burlington Skyway freeway traffic management system. And what we had seen were the big computer companies, Honeywell and others, that were providing software, and typically it was a failure. And it was a failure because the people who were providing the platforms really didn't understand the essence, the purpose of what the software was to do. What were the benefits? And we took a bit of a leap, and we said, maybe this is an opportunity for us. And so with a partner out of the United States, we got into the software development, and that became our first major deployment of software. Subsequent to that, and almost within about 6 months as that was being rolled out and turned on, we were successful in Scotland, Boston, and California. And we grew from a very small group of about 20 people to about 60 people in about 8 months. So, and it was a very specialized area, but all of a sudden we had become recognized as a global player in this very narrow space. And we were not just a designer, but we were a solution provider. And that was a huge step for us. Subsequent to that, if I get on just for another second, though, we were providing big systems that took a long time to develop, cost a lot of money, to governments, and governments changed their policies. And it became a big concern for us that, and they rely on a tax base. And we saw another opportunity, which was the bridge to Prince Edward Island. And it was a toll bridge. It had to have a traffic management system. And we thought, tolling. Now there you're part of the income stream of the people who are building the asset. And that led to our first toll system in Canada and first toll system globally. And it became very important because, as I said, we were part of that revenue stream between the users who benefit from the asset through to the owners. And we became, if you will, the tax collector on behalf of the owners. So it was a whole new thrust for us, and really vital because so much of what we even talk about now, managing assets, is how do you pay for them? How do you pay for even the operating cost?
And on reflection, with all that's been created, with these systems en masse, has anyone gone back to look at the data to tell you, are you seeing any stories out of the data now that you can look back so many years?
Well, there's the data on our side, and we certainly, I mean, right now, as an observation, we process about 400,000 revenue trips a day. We collect about 1.3 or $4 billion on behalf of our clients globally in toll systems that we have in place in India, Greece, the Caribbean, Mexico, and Canada, and now the United States. One of the big things that has come out, especially, and also on the traffic management side, where we have some 30 systems deployed globally, the big thing that has come out of it is that there's been an evolution in thinking about how these solutions should be provided. Clients are no longer willing to spend or able to spend millions of dollars and wait 2 or 3 years for something to be deployed. They want a solution now that's cost effective now. And so we've had to rethink our whole model about how to respond to the market. How do we lead the market? How can we invest in the right kinds of solutions that get us out ahead of the competition? And that has been very instructive. And so we've made a move, and maybe I can talk on that a little later, about to delivering services as SaaS models in a much different way.
So globally, how much is IBI tech focused?
About 20% of our revenue comes from through our intelligence sector. And we are reinvesting about 1% of the total revenue of the firm back into new development and new products. I've talked a lot about the transportation side, but what is really important is that if you look at the elements of the transportation solutions, it's getting data, managing data, and then applying it more widely to realize other benefits. We have that insight in buildings. We understand why people need buildings. They understand the value proposition within those buildings or in other kinds of infrastructure. So our big thrust has been to then adapt our thinking and the tools and technology around creating new services for building owners and infrastructure owners. Doesn't matter if it's asset management or EV, electric vehicles, or virtual reality, augmented reality, whatever it might be. We feel it's really important to be able to have that attachment to the assets that we design. They're fabulous, iconic buildings, but historically, that would be it. You know, we would design the building, we would never see or have any more involvement in it for years. And now our thrust is to be part of the continuing evolution of those buildings, in large part through the use of technology to manage not only the building, but also activities within the assets.
So clearly you see a need for technology in these buildings that hasn't been solved. Many would say that the next evolution of technology for buildings are digital twins. How's IBI positioning itself to be a provider of a digital twin?
I mean, it's a great question. Because we see the digital twin as providing the platform that provides us that continuity over the life cycle, right through to then the operations and management and asset maintenance of the asset. You know, everything we are doing is in a digital format now. I would say everything, 90% of it. We do find that some of our clients are still in some of the contracts, and even in certain cases, in some of the contractors, we're still sort of stuck back a few years. But our objective is to be part of a much more cost-effective solution to be able to provide hard assets. As you and I have discussed, Terry, many times, the cost of construction has really not realized any of the great benefits of technology over the years. If you look at even going 30 or 40 years back, it's all been at the fringes. And we really have to be able to look at a different way of building. We see that the digital twin is part of how we can start to break down the barriers that exist between the planning, the design, the construction, the implementation, the operations, and maintenance. And we see the digital twin as this, if you will, this vein that connects all of that.
So recently you've created what we call the IBI sandbox.
Yes.
And maybe you can tell us a bit why you've created that. Who are some of the participants, and what it is you were trying to achieve with having that sandbox?
Maybe if I can put it into context, we decided 2.5 years ago, that we had to make a pivot to be a technology-driven design firm. And there were 4 components to the pivot. So it's not just that we're going to be using the latest in BIM platforms and tools and robots, but that's a key part of it. We want to be more efficient about what we do. We want to be able to deliver things faster, better, cheaper. And that's stream 1 of our pivot. The second part is that we're creating these new platforms as software as a service, a new revenue stream, and a new relationship with clients that go on for an extended period of time. The third part of our pivot is about being part of all new technology. It doesn't matter if it's 5G or blockchain or virtual reality, augmented reality. And we thought, okay, that's pretty compelling. But we also realized when we looked around at what was happening in the tech ecosystem was that there was really there was nothing that was happening for cities. And so we felt we wanted to be part of that ecosystem about technology and urban environments. And thus we created the Sandbox, Smart City Sandbox. And it has a variety of partners on the construction side. It has also OPG as an energy provider, critical component of cities and their growth. The Weather Network. It has the Ontario Centre of Excellence, which is a platform for supporting startups, and a developer. And it was all about bringing the right kinds of parties together so that we could engage, clash, and innovate in a more creative way. We actually built out the Smart City Sandbox in our office, and we were going to launch it at the last AGM, and COVID came along. And so we didn't. But what we have done, and I can share with others later, is we have built a digital twin, back to your earlier question, of the sandbox. And the Ontario Centre of Excellence just used that digital twin to run their AGM. And you actually go into the sandbox. You can go to where OCE presents their information. You go and see the different startups, and you can engage with the different platforms and services that they are providing. And we see that's it's a bit Marshall McLuhan in that the medium becomes the message. And there we are describing the digital twin, new technology, and there we're embedding the experience in this kind of environment to really illustrate how IBI is making this pivot to technology. And who knows, Terry, maybe in time we will be a technology company driving design.
That is the vision, isn't it?
That is the vision.
Are there any other ideas that came out of the sandbox recently that sort of inspired you?
We had we had a retreat, an IBI retreat, and we created out of that notion something called the Hub. And we had all the IBI people go to this, they registered, and it was a virtual building. And you would go into the foyer of the building, you would go into where there were speaking sessions, you would go into other areas that showcased various projects that we had done, or new platforms or new software that we were promoting, or places where you could go and meet colleagues within the firm. Again, all digital. And everybody experienced it from their home. It was over 2 days. So we see this is a whole new area of opportunity for us that's a bit different than what we've seen in the past of what I would call the single screen displays. This is an immersive experience for people. The other things that came out of the sandbox, though, for us is that we have invested in various companies, and that was part of the objective of the sandbox, was to be part of what was happening in the ecosystem. And one of those investments is in Switch, an EV charging company, that we felt, because we have so many clients in the buildings area, electric vehicles are the target is, I think, about 50% of the vehicle fleet will be, of the new vehicle fleet will be electric vehicles by 2025. Charging is going to be a really big issue, and the electrical grid to support that is going to be a big issue. So you really need smart chargers, and that's why we went to Switch. We become the glue between the clients and Switch, the startup. So we become a route to market, and that's our philosophy about being in the sandbox, is that we are a route to market. We have domain knowledge, and we can't create all of the solutions ourselves. That would be foolish of us. But we can be a facilitator for that, along with our other partners in the sandbox, because we see that as a way that we're really going to solve some of the many challenges that we have in urban environments.
I'm with you, Scott. I see the desire for people to charge their cars while they're parked in their apartments is going to become a very big deal. And right now, even buildings that are being delivered today are just meeting the minimum requirements for electric charging.
Yes.
And a lot of these condos are going to be in trouble trying to figure out that solution.
Very quickly, and then it goes right back into the grid and how you manage that, and opportunities for other passive kinds of energy generation. But the other thing that came out of the innovation side was, and I just want to touch on it briefly, is some of our new solutions that I thought you might find of interest.
Sure.
We developed when COVID came along, and all of a sudden social distancing, self-declaration of health and well-being was really important. And extending that along with managing the use of the space, like back to our traffic management systems, we built a platform called InSpace. And it's all about office environments, people going into the office. We have social distancing. We can only really use about 30% of the space with social distancing. We want people to self-declare. We want to know when they've been in the office, where they sat, when it needs to be cleaned again. And so we built this platform called InSpace. And I'm pleased to say within 2 weeks of us launching the product, we had our first sale. And just this past week, we were able to secure an arrangement with a very significant accounting firm where they have over 1,000 users now using the platform. And it's all about the efficient management of the space itself, along with the building.
That's fantastic. That your sounds like your time to market was really rapid. You understood a problem, and you were able to deploy a solution with ease and agility.
Agility is the key word, certainly, because in this space that we're in this world we're in, speed to market is vital.
So if someone has a great idea at IBI, Scott, how does that get up to the right listeners so that you can action?
There's certainly been a culture within IBI, and I witness our intelligence practice and how it grew. If people have good ideas, they are given the latitude, the freedom, the sense of authority to move on it, to not just think about it, but to take action. Now, we are a company, and we have certain requirements around normal business practices, but as long as you're doing that, innovation is a key part of what we do, and everyone should be considering that. We have run competitions internally. We've run global competitions. We have run hackathons, and we've had winners out of those. And in fact, one of those hackathons has led to another product that we've created called Curb IQ. We see the management of curb space being really important in cities in the future, especially because of e-commerce and limited curb space availability, the future need for more EV charging, and where those EV chargers are. So we developed this platform called Curb IQ, and in its ultimate form, we see it replacing the need for signs on curbs that say don't park here or park there between these hours, because it would be all digital, and it would be then available digitally in the in-vehicle information system. So it will improve the physical environment, it will improve the management environment, it will improve the revenue generation for cities, and do so in a very safe way. So that's our vision about Curb IQ.
So multiple solutions on the go.
multiple solutions. Now,
So,
we're not going to be successful in every one, and that's part of what startups are all about. And so we're building this startup mentality within the organization that don't worry about failing. Worry about taking action. And if you fail, okay, we'll learn from it so we can go on and then do other really interesting things. But we will succeed ultimately.
has COVID accelerated the adoption of the trial and error of a lot of these platforms, Scott?
Geez. Well, first and foremost, the biggest fear that we had with COVID, and like most of us, we all adapted very quickly. We were within 2 weeks, we had everybody working from home globally. Our biggest concern was on the client side, and governments in particular not being able to adapt quickly. But I have to tell you, there was like a warlike mentality that took over, and the rate of change has been staggering. And we have seen governments change from what was a 5-year program to getting things now set up in 3 weeks. And that's the new way of doing work. And that applies to when you're working with them directly, or if you are working on behalf of your private sector clients, getting approvals and such. And so the benefits have been huge, absolutely huge on everything.
So not only for yourself, Scott.
The environment, and yes, it's for everyone. Yes, so that part has been really quite enlightening. But what's also really important about it, Terry, as you know, it's all being enabled by technology. I mean, if you did not have the platforms in place, then you are going to experience very significant revenue drops and a drop in profitability or whatever might be on the private sector side, and huge risk, massive risk. And the firms who are able to adapt with technology, changing procedures have actually done very well.
Fascinating. So do you see the digital and PropTech has transformed the built environment in Toronto already, or are we still on our journey?
I think we have just touched the tip of the iceberg. I think there is all kinds of things that are yet to come. And it's everything from cladding on buildings and solar generated energy from the building cladding, on-site storage, the autonomous and connected vehicles, the electric autonomous and connected vehicles, or the connected autonomous shared electric vehicles, which is the new kind of moniker. The ability to work from home, I think, is going to change the mix of how the home is now going to work. I would think that there will be pressure on the smaller condos. But on the other hand, it creates new opportunities in the podiums in these various buildings that are no longer now being used for bricks and mortar commerce because of e-commerce, that those then become part of the community of that environment. And you may have seen a significant reference to the 15-minute community going forward, where we still will have high rises, we will have density, but the community will be what is within the 15 minutes. That doesn't negate large-scale public transit, because it will go from those nodes and connect those nodes, but it's not the same kind of profile of demand that we used to have of those peaks. We will have a nice flat demand. I think it's great opportunity to take advantage of that flattening of the curve, getting better realization of value from our infrastructure. One of our initiatives in the energy sector was to implement systems that cut the peak down of demand. And this is related to our water Blue IQ platform. The energy savings, I mean, we also have peak energy consumption that has a peak cost rate to it. And if you can reduce and this is where switch was important for us. One of the big areas with switch and electric vehicles is with that electric vehicle fleet, those electric vehicles could become a very massive store of energy, drawing down cheap energy through the night, relatively cheap, because the reactors are still going. You could keep the turbines going, fewer of them, and you're still generating energy, but you don't have the size now in your plants for that peak demand in the morning because you can draw it back from the vehicles. And it sounds a bit like, really? But if you start to look at the scale of the electric vehicle population and therefore the potential to cut down on those peaks in the morning and the afternoon, the benefit to the community and cities at large will be enormous. Very exciting times.
Wow. So if you had to give future digital advice to the architectural, engineering, and construction community, what would you have to say about the future of digital and prop tech evolving over the next 3 to 5 years or 5 to 10 years?
One, get involved. Two, it's more than just getting a better front end digital tools and how you do your work. I think you have to really consider it in a more fulsome way about what the ultimate solution is and what the value proposition is in terms of recognizing fully that those buildings are going to be going through dynamic changes. And all of that is going to be driven by technology. And so, I mean, the simple answer would be think more widely, going beyond traditional or simple, the obvious digital solutions, because there are exciting times ahead and you really want to be part of that, or otherwise you won't exist. I mean, I've said that many times to firms. If you don't have a broad digital plan, and the digital plan goes beyond just BIM and virtual reality, if you don't have a broad digital plan, you won't be in business in 5 or 8 years.
There are those out there that realize digital is upon us, but really don't know where to go for a digital strategy. Where would they go? Who would they look to?
Give me a call. I mean, that's a good question. And I've seen some firms adapt by, for example, going out and hiring a senior person responsible for a digital strategy. And that's one way to go. I would say that another would be to reach out and become part of the ecosystem more fully. And by that, I mean, our concept in setting up the sandbox is that this was not, it is not the exclusive domain of IBI. It is really it is out there for designers, contractors, suppliers, infrastructure service companies to work together to address the challenges, look at the solutions, and be more engaged in the content of what's new and exciting. And that to me, I mean, I offer the sandbox up as a place for people to consider and come to, but I would encourage everyone to look out into their community and get engaged with what's happening, because it is really exciting.
There's 5G is upon us. I would say that connectivity has become of top importance for building owners. There are ways to measure your connectivity and protect it, like wired score. Making sure that people have multiple options as it relates to data in their building, 5G, how it's deployed, taking advantage of the 5G in their building, and then understanding the nature of IoT. There's a couple of technologies that are there now, and really it takes very little planning to ensure that you have that you're 5G ready or IoT ready in a building. Sometimes owners don't appreciate how little upfront can help them in their buildings.
Yes.
But pushing early will make a huge difference so that they're digital twin ready at the end of it all.
Right, and just even making allowances for 5G units to go into the building, making provisions for it at the time you're putting the building together. I mean, it's such a low cost, and because it will be, and is, especially in buildings, it will be the platform of managing the building, providing service to the tenants and condo owners. It is so important And we need to be more forward-looking about how we consider that in the building design.
How much of the ecosystem that you're a part of, let's say IBI in the architecture side, is delivering a Revit model? Do you see the other consultants following suit so that it makes it easier to coordinate? Are other consultants on board yet?
I think there's a major push. Yes. And it's rapidly changing. I would say that we have been pushing Revit and BIM for 8 years or 10 years, probably longer. And in different parts of our company, you know, in the UK, they've been way ahead with standards around it. But in certain markets, I hate to say it, we're still, because the contract requires it, we issue a set of PDF drawings and as our product to the contractor. Right? And that, I find that really quite disappointing, because it speaks to a limitation on the future. We have some challenges. I think we have a need and we have some challenges. The need is to be able to create what I had described earlier as a seamless kind of relationship from planning through to implementation and operations. And that will set up a much more efficient use in the ultimate end. It will make the cost of construction cheaper and I trust faster. But one of the limitations that we have is in our industry is this friction that takes place. Transactional friction that me handing off or IBI handing off a set of drawings and plans in whatever form, in its digital form, to someone else is a point of friction. And we have to simplify that. And the approvals of those plans. I mean, what our vision on the building side is that if we can, it's like writing software. And you know, the agile methodology and Kanban and those kinds of tools. Well, that they came out of software. So if you start to think about it, that we apply that into our design of buildings on the construction side, think of an approval bot or AI that goes around approving. It sits out there and you're doing your design and you draw in what the zoning requirements are, what the building code requirements are, the building requirements as defined by the client. And so you have these sets of requirements. And you're constantly then being measured against them. So you're doing the design once because you're being sort of guided by the limitations of these regulations. And you now what's happening is there's a robot in the background that's saying, oh, you can't do that, can't do that. So then when you're finished faster, it's less expensive, better quality. And when you then give that to the city to approve, now imagine if it said on it, approved by Acme certifier, an auditable bot or robot. Imagine what the city now has to look at. They don't have to go, I mean, think of, you know, how many times they go through drawings and they do the checks of the drawing. You don't have to do that anymore. And so we are involved in some small initiatives about how can we take robots and technology to be able to bring in all these disparate sources of regulations and controls around our platforms to be able to create that ultimate solution. And then also, so we're protected, because insurance is another big issue and liability. So that when it gets handed off to the contractor, or maybe it gets seamed, if you will, to the contractor, and maybe not handed off, it's sort of a seaming process. There is an understanding about the assumption of risk and liability in that. And I know right now our insurance companies are very, very concerned about liabilities because of what's happened in the world and the cost of insurance. But we need to do more in that area about how can we manage that friction, if you will, between design and construction, and then even handing off, so that there's a much more seamless process. I don't have a solution, but I know it's a huge need, and it's something that collectively we should all be focused on and making for a better outcome that is faster, better, and less expensive.
Yeah, that would work a lot better for us as a constructor, being able to receive a vetted model that's a live model that we believe has most of the clash detection looked after.
Yes.
That allows us to put a 4D schedule together,
Yes.
improve it, take it to a 4D level,
Yes.
LOD 400,
Yep.
and then make the building digital twin ready, and have a company like yourself being able then to kick into gear the digital twin and the ultimate solution for the client. And this way you're through the entire process, not in sort of start and finish mode, because once you've handed over your design, you're basically done.
Right. And then and then we get accused because the in the field there's something that comes up, and we end up spending a lot of money then on field services that require a lot of kind of advice, and yeah, it sets up all kinds of uncomfortable situations. So we need to be able to do more with technology to avoid that, so we have a much more seamless arrangement.
So now now that you've sort of touched on parameters and design, have you started applying some of this technique to parametric design, Scott?
Parametric just yes. I mean, the simple answer is yes. We did a recent, one's cute and one's more fundamental. We did a building that was to be, and I guess I can say this now, with Pharrell Williams, who was gave it the design kind of aura. And what we did was to take a song of Pharrell Williams, run it through a sound oscillator, and then use the frequencies to articulate the finished treatment of the balconies and the glass articulation of it. And it was in keeping with the frequencies of a part of the song of Pharrell Williams. That was done in large measure through parametric modeling. But we're involved, and that's interesting, that's sort of catchy. But what we're now working on is much more compelling. It's taking parametric and modeling into a whole different realm, and it's more in the industrial space. Again, focused on what is the value proposition it's really a value proposition in the building. What's the building producing? And in this case, it's an automotive line. And how do we optimize the movement of all the component parts coming into that building that feed then the line in an efficient way, so that you start to look at supply chains, delivery, truck stops, building size, relationship of the truck stops relative to the production line. And that is really, really fascinating. The one other area where we have applied parametric modeling is around transit stations, and the ability to move the station along the alignment and look at different densities then in a dynamic way around that to see if there's incremental value that is created from the station that would benefit both the city and also pay for the station, so benefit the service provider, be better for the users, and do it in a sort of a time evolution dynamic manner. So you could look at, well, how much might be invested at the beginning, how much density, when would you allow the density, and how do we then, over a period of time, pay that off? That was fascinating because it was physical planning, it was zoning, it was transportation, it was finance. So we do a lot of work in the parametric world, much more than just what I would call the physical representation of the building. Parametric modeling is a big interest to me. I go back to my graduating days in applying models about how to make more efficient use of environments.
Be interesting to understand how that modeling can assist with what a client might see as the optimized operation of their building at the very end
Yes,
through a digital twin.
right. And even then, keeping the digital twin as an active in the operations, so that you have other kinds of sensors. It's just not about the building temperature and so on. It's about the processes within the building.
Right.
That gets really pretty exciting. I don't know what the answer is, but it gets pretty exciting.
So Scott, any final thoughts on digital and the opportunity in the industry? Clearly, I think after people watch this webcast, they'll have a different view as to what a traditional engineering and architectural firm has evolved into and where it's going. Any other final thoughts?
I think the final thought would be, and it really comes from the software world. And in the software world, there's a model and a whole group called the GitHub, and I mention it not because I necessarily see it as an organizational model, but GitHub is a series of specialized people around the world. I think when I last looked at, there were like 30 million participants in GitHub. And you go out to GitHub and you say, I want to do some development. I need this kind of product. And people from GitHub come together and create a solution. And they do it faster, better, cheaper. And I only reference it because it speaks to breaking down barriers. And one of the things that you see for, unfortunately, corporate reasons or legal reasons or whatever it might be, that there's a real sense of closeness that takes place in our industry where, oh, I invented something. Well, I got to tell you that if you invented it, it may have a half-life of 6 months. But if you can share that and collaborate with others, it can become the foundation for the business, for the company, and for you that has a life that keeps going. And I think it's really important that we, as an industry, open up and be much more collaborative about the solutions that we apply, the technology that we apply, and the vision of where we're going with it. And that would be my one desire to see out of this.
I think that's great advice. Excellent. Well, Scott, I want to thank you on behalf of ULI for taking the time to share this great insight, the great stories, and your vision. And looking forward to seeing the reaction of people after they've watched this very precious 1 hour.
Terry, thank you very much. Terry, it is always such a pleasure.